Hey everybody, Tony D with a hot take on Columbus. Now, I've been arguing with these woke idiots on Reddit about Columbus, and let me explain Columbus Day. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because, as some of you may or may not know, I wrote a book, a funny book about Italian heritage called "F You, I'm Italian: Why We Italians Are Awesome" for Ulysses Press. It's available on Amazon. So I did some research into Columbus Day. Not only for the book, but for myself, being an Italian American. And I found out some really interesting facts. So Columbus Day was created by an Italian immigrant in the early 1900s in Denver, Colorado, and it was pushed through the legislature by a helpful state senator who was Hispanic. So I read that and I was like, wow, this is like an amazing holiday because it's like two groups of immigrants came together to help each other in America. I mean, it's like the American dream. And yet, everybody's so upset about Columbus. Oh, terrible Columbus. And then I got to thinking the other day, hi, Joe. I got to thinking the other day, come here, doggy. Come on, let everybody see your face. You came over here. I got to thinking the other day, why are there so many statues of Columbus? Well, I think the reason is this. Columbus as a figure in history was important to the Italian Americans. And because in the early 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, southern Italy was going through a lot of changes. Italy was forming as a country. You know, prior to 1850, there was no Italy. It was a bunch of crazy kingdoms and, you okay, Joe? Crazy kingdoms and city-states and whatnot. It wasn't united until 1850-ish, somewhere in there. So after that, that's when all the Italian immigrants started coming over to America because there were a lot of changes going on after Italy was unified, and there wasn't a lot of work in the southern regions. So they came here to make some money. A lot of them went back to Italy with that money. Just like Mexicans come here today and do a lot of the grunt work, the Italians came here and they did the grunt work. At that time, it was like coal mining and, lumberjack and, really hard working kind of stuff. But you were making so much money as compared to your money back in the old country, it was worth it because you could take that money and then take it back to your home country and and really do some, I don't want to say damage, but really buy some stuff, get some land, get a real house, You couldn't make that kind of money in Italy at that time. So it was crucially important because there was a real hostility towards Italian Americans during that era. There was lynchings in the southern states. Yeah, actual lynchings of Italians, partly due because of the presence of the mafia at that time. And the mafia wasn't known as a thing then. It was just, criminality that was blamed. Well, that was the fault of some Italians, but was blamed on all Italians. And I guarantee you, it wasn't any of the mafiosos hanging from that rope. It was probably some innocent Italian guys who they could catch. Because that's the kind of mob justice, that's the kind of justice mob rule mets out. And this went on to the early 1900s. So it was really important for Italian Americans to have something, to have a stake in this country that they were calling their own. So having Columbus Day was this huge thing for them. It became, Columbus Day isn't just about Columbus, it's about Italian Americans. And so I think that's why there were so many statues of Columbus, because I think the progressives of that era looked at Columbus as a safe bet to not only do something nice for the immigrants, but to do something that everybody in America would accept too, because, they taught the kids a simplification that, Columbus discovered America. And so now you have all these woke idiots tearing down a statue, right? And they're crying, oh my God, he was a slave owner. Oh my God, how could you, a guy on Reddit actually called them a monster. And I was just like, Jesus, dude, you're out of line. You're just totally out of line. What you have to understand, the 1400s, Columbus lived in the late 1400s to 1500s. That's the beginning of the Renaissance. Slavery lasted throughout human history, all the way up until, they started to abolish it in the UK. They started the ball rolling there, and until the United States finally officially. And this is just the government's abolishing slavery. This doesn't count like, the slavery we still have today, the de facto slavery we have. But government slavery was finally abolished. But that wouldn't be for hundreds of years after Columbus. So you have to put yourself in the context of that time period. If you had a ship and you were going exploring various places, and maybe you're going to set up a settlement, or maybe you're going to acquire whatever resources are there, you either send your crew to go do it, your exhausted crew, or you get slaves to do it. And that's what they did. And I'm not condoning slavery, but the people at that time would, because they knew nothing else. So if you were an abolitionist in the 1400s and you said, hey, let's all free the slaves, everyone, people would have looked at you like you were out of your mind. They would have said, you can't run a plantation without slaves, you idiot. What are you going to free all the slaves? Where are they going to go? Who's going to feed them? That wouldn't have worked for that time period. They just wouldn't have understood. So the idea that these woke idiots on Reddit and Twitter, well, if they were around during the 1400s, they would have been freeing the slaves left and right. And Columbus should have went to Queen Isabella. She was the queen he got a lot of his funding from, and said, well, I'll go on an expedition, but I'm not going to take any slaves. No, she never would have funded his trip, because slaves were a resource like everything else in that time. It was like, you have to get gold. Obviously, gold was at the top of the list. There was a bunch of things on the top of the list, but slaves were on the list too. And he couldn't have gotten the funding unless he agreed to try to get all her money back and then some, because that was the whole point of an expedition. And when he got there, he didn't find cities of gold, but he did find people to enslave. So thus, he planned on enslaving them. Now, there are a lot of different things happened between his various trips, but I won't get into the whole thing because I want to hit the sweet spot of 10 minutes. But, the idea to pick on Columbus specifically because he owned slaves in the 1400s is insane. It's just insane. It was a matter of survival, too. Because keep in mind who ran the world at that time. Kings and queens, divine monarchs, who could literally have you killed like that. Oh, I didn't like the way you said that. Off with his head. Don't like the color of your scarf there. I got one just like it. Off with his head. I don't like you. Into the dungeons. Then off with his head. I mean, you can't be a woke idiot during this time. Nobody would tolerate you. No king or queen would ever see you. You would have never gotten past the door to say, oh, Queen Isabella, it's wrong to take slaves. People didn't talk that way because slavery was in the Bible. And that's what they followed mostly. I mean, the Christians did. For the Muslims, well, they had slaves too. And, it was a competition on the planet of which country or which kingdom was going to survive and thrive. And the other kingdoms were happy to invade you and wipe you out if they could and take all your resources and enslave your people. So it wasn't just a matter of, well, we don't like brown people, let's go find some to enslave. They were doing it for a practical purpose from their perspective. Now, obviously, we live in a modern age. We don't condone that sort of thing, although it still happens somehow. Hello, Libya. But these woke idiots who are tearing down the statues, they're just tearing down history because they don't like history, because they want to remake everything in their crazy Marxist image. But Columbus, if you're going to judge him on moral grounds, do not judge lest ye be judged, as the Bible says. And, these idiots, they don't judge themselves. They just judge everybody else. I mean, the guy on Reddit just went on and on about what a monster, what a piece of filth Columbus was. And I just thought, hey, this is a pretty strong reaction to a historical figure that lived like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I mean, and he wasn't the only one that took slaves. And in fact, the founder of Yale, who was a slave owner, loved slavery so much, he passed an ordinance in his little port town that you couldn't even bring your ship in unless you had at least 10 slaves on it. So it wasn't like Columbus had much of a choice but to engage in slavery if he was going to have a functional explorer operation. So, my point is, back off on Columbus, okay? The statues, they're not all about him. They're about Italian Americans. They're about a group of immigrants who came to this country and worked hard. And yes, Italians are pretty integrated to society. We're not looking for a handout or anything. But, it'd be nice if we could just tolerate the statues. If you want to put up some more statues, more power to you. Do what the Italians did. Find a park where a bunch of you live. Put up your own statue. Whoever you want. What do I care? It's not my park. If it's your park and you live there, I'm sure everybody will love the statue. Whoever you want. Whatever figure from history you like. I mean, obviously, there's going to be some figures of history you'll go, well, I don't think you should put him up. But most figures from history, and I think the ones that should have a statue, the ones that everybody can agree that are pretty good overall. But I bet these Marxists, these Antifa morons, they're not going to pick a statue because they don't have anybody to look up to. They only look up to themselves. I think in a way, Antifa really is just a bunch of narcissists. It's just political narcissism, the way they tear down statues and try to destroy history. Anyhow, cut Columbus some slack. Poor guy, he's trying to put together a deal. Yeah, he may have taken some slaves. I don't condone the behavior, but it was the 1400s, dude. The 1400s.